mindset helped you progress the most as a BJJ white belt?
As a Jiu-Jitsu white belt, there are a lot of different things you can focus on. There are a lot of different mindsets you can have. A very common and acceptable mindset to have is, this is something I just do for fun, and it doesn't really matter if I'm good at it or bad at it. Don't mind if you have that mindset, but if you really want to progress, like I did when I was a white belt, the mindset that helped me more than anything was consistency and measuring my progress in months versus weeks. When I mean consistency, specifically I'm referring to week-to-week consistency that adds up to a 6-month chunk. Consistency at the bare minimum is 2 days a week with a bonus third day at least once a month. That's probably the minimum to get consistent progress in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My general purpose recommendation is 3 days per week. Solid, consistent 3 days per week, you will progress at a very consistent and very measurable rate. If you can't make 3 days per week, get 2 that you're super committed on and a third bonus day if your week schedule is light enough to allow it. This is what I did. I was able to consistently train 4 days per week with a bonus 5th if I was really able to, but it was more those 4 days per week and sometimes 3 days per week that allowed me to consistently progress in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I didn't have a specific focused mindset about a game plan I was working on or a Jiu-Jitsu journal and a specific technique progression path that I was focused on. Instead, I was just focused on showing up and letting the skill and the knowledge build up over time. And as a white belt, you don't really need to focus on making a specific game to work in competition, although you can, especially once you start getting towards the end of your white belt career. You can focus on specific moves in Jiu-Jitsu, but if you're a true white belt like I was, who's never trained before in any grappling martial art, just showing up consistently and learning different things that the coaches are showing that day will eventually add up to an overall knowledge. If you want something specifically to focus on, understand the major positions in Jiu-Jitsu, how to go from one to another, and a couple attacks. So the major positions in Jiu-Jitsu, from worst to better, is if someone is on your back and they're controlling your legs with hooks and they've got the seatbelt wrapped around with you, that's the worst position in Jiu-Jitsu. If they come around in front of you and they're on top of you, over top like this, and you're laying down on your back, you're in the bottom of mount position. That's a slightly better position, but still very bad, because they're at least in front of you. When they're behind you, you can't even really see what they're doing. They both score 4 points in Jiu-Jitsu if you care about points, but they're both bad positions. A slightly better but still bad position is side control. Sometimes knee on belly, where you put their knee on the belly, is equivalent-ish to side control. It's slightly different. But for the most part, when they're not mounted over top of you, but they're on the side of you, still not a good position, but a little bit better than mount. Then would be guard, so a position where your legs are in front of them. Sometimes you can wrap them up in your closed guard where you lock them behind, but guard is anytime your legs are in front of them. Maybe they're on the ground, maybe they're standing up on their feet, but just putting your legs in between you and them is way better than them being past the legs and on side of you. Then, a better position for that would be for you to be on top in their guard. Now, this is a little bit debatable. Sometimes people say it's better to be on bottom, some people say it's better to be on top, but this is the progression path. Then we start going around their legs. Now you're in side control, better position. Then you go to mount, better than side control. Then you take their back, better than mount. And you go from that scale all the way to a submission. Now, there are submissions you can catch along the way in basically every position, but they're the most likely when you're in the best position, and they're the least likely when you're in the worst position. There are technically submissions you can do. If someone's on your back, there are technically things you can do to submit them. Especially if they cross their legs, you can do what's called an ankle lock. But that's very low percentage. It's very unlikely to happen compared to if you're reversed. If you're on their back, there are a lot of submissions you can do. You can choke them with your arms. You can choke them with your legs in a triangle. You can attack their arms to either put them in a worse position to where they're out of the equation, then you choke their neck, or to even get an armbar. You can attack their arms directly. There are a bunch of things you can do in that position, and they're much more likely to happen. That's why you want to get to a better position. So if you're in a bad position, learn how to get to a better position. And that way you're never lost as far as what to do. And over time, that knowledge will build up. You can get a piece here, get a piece there, get a piece here, get a piece there. And if you get that consistency, in 3 months you'll see some progress, but really try to make it 6 whole months in a row. From where you were on the first day to where you are in 6 months, you'll be a completely different grappler, a completely different person. And the way you measure this is actually by training with people who are newer. If you make it the entire 6 months, chances are there will be some days throughout that 6 months where people who have never trained before show up to jiu-jitsu. And when you're still a newer white belt, you can try really hard against new people without hurting them. Once you get to blue, advanced purple, you're going to have to start holding back against day one white belts. But if you're in that new white belt phase, don't feel bad against trying pretty hard. Don't be mean. Don't try to cross-face them super hard. Don't be overly aggressive. You ideally want to be a good martial artist who's composed, who's using energy when you should, right? You want to be a good athlete, a good jiu-jitsu practitioner. But you don't necessarily have to baby them. You don't have to hold back a lot like you will when you're much, much, much better than them. When you're a little bit better than them, you can create a good training environment and hopefully bring them up to your level. So that way you guys can both keep getting better. Iron sharpens iron, as they say. And eventually you'll get a good training partner. Along the way, especially once you get into that 6 months period, if you get the opportunity to roll with someone who's in their first couple weeks, first month or two of jiu-jitsu, chances are you'll be better than them. Chances are you'll be able to put them from they're in a good position to where you can defend out of it. If they're in mount, you can push their legs, you can put your legs in front of them, and then now you're a guard. And then you know how to sweep them, so that way you put them in a bad position. Then eventually you'll be able to submit somebody. Having that mindset of consistency while letting the overall picture of jiu-jitsu sink in and consistently measuring progress is what allowed me to advance in jiu-jitsu. It wasn't any specific game plan I was making because I didn't have one. It wasn't any specific training methodology other than show up consistently. And every bit of exposure added to my overall knowledge, added to the pot, and it eventually added up. And especially 6 months in, I was way better at jiu-jitsu than I was when I first started. And it was thanks to that consistency and the mindset of measuring a little bit of progress against the newer people. It's not to say I was mean to the newer people, but I did try to put them in bad spots, and eventually they got better. I got better, I got to measure my progress, and overall it was good. And that is the mindset that really helped me progress in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a white belt.